Hello, everybody. Happy day to you. Hope that you are well today. Hope you are at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength. Truly, that is the case. And glad that you are here to join us today for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Who else? And today's important topic is Kwame Nkrumah's work properly assessed? And we would start that by saying that most of you have probably heard little to nothing about Kwame Nkrumah. Maybe you don't know his name. Maybe you know something about him in Africa. But the point of today's session is even if you don't know a whole lot about Nkrumah himself, in revolutionary organizing work, it's never important that people know your name as an organizer. What's always the gauge of the effectiveness of your work is how well people know your work. So in revolutionary organizing work, they don't know you, but they know what you've done. And that is certainly true as it relates to Kwame Nkrumah. People may not know him or may not know much about him, but the uh, roster of movements and people that he influenced. Everybody from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to Patrice Lumumba to Frantz Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture is endless. It's absolutely endless. So this is what we're going to talk about today: a proper assessment of Nkrumah's work, and we do that starting as we always do, paying honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. The last couple of weekends, I've been myself involved in some serious anti fascism work yesterday as well as the week before. And that continues. And a lot of that is connected to the struggles taking place among the indigenous communities. They are under attack, like a lot of our communities are under attack. And we are not confused. We know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was correct when he said, "A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And for the people who say, "Well, that ain't got nothing to do with us," when you say something like that, you tell us immediately that you're not directly involved in the work. You're just somebody expressing opinions that you don't really understand. So we will engage in work to weaken our enemies. That's exactly what we'll do. And so we honor the indigenous people, and I'm just honored that I can play a role in helping to strengthen their communities because I'm no fool. And I understand that the stronger their community is, the stronger my community is, because whether people see it like this or not, we're fighting against the same enemies. So definitely, whatever every part of the like, if you have an enemy and one person weakens their kneecaps and you're fighting the same enemy, you're a fool if you say, "Well, I that ain't got nothing to do with me." I mean, if they weaken the kneecaps, you go for the jugular vein, and that's how you bring them down faster and more effectively. So that's how we look at the work. That's what we do. And also, of course, our African ancestors, we pay homage and tribute to them. They are, of course, the reason why we are able to be here today. And we are just honored, thrilled, and humbled to be able to stand in their presence and do this work. This happens all the time. But yesterday, I was at a session where some of the work I described to you, and I asked the people to do introductions before we got started with the assignments and training that we were going to do. And the person, as we were walking over, asked me, "What is your name?" And I told him, Ajamu. And I know from experience, like I take time and pronounce each syllable because I know, we're all here trained to think through the colonial lens, but it still happens every time. And so the person said, "John, good to meet you, John." And I said, "No, I don't, I gave my colonial name back uh, 41 years ago. I don't have a name like that." I said, "My name is Jamu." Oh, okay, that's great. I'm like, yeah. I'm not, I explain to people like I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but too many people have died and suffered for me to disrespect my ancestors like that, right? Like we've consistently fought against this colonialism. I don't want to be like I saw a clip of Muhammad Ali, and he was being interviewed in the late '60s on television, and the interviewer um, called him Cassius Clay, which was his slave name, of course, and he interrupted the guy and he said, That's not my name. I'm not no white man. I don't want to be called by no white man's name." And, for people that don't understand this, like, they get in their feelings about it and feel like he's insulting them. But that was 100% correct response that Ali gave him. Because what he's doing is that's strong anti-colonial work. He's trying to say that I want to think like a free, independent African person. I don't want to be thinking through the lens that you've provided to me through the process of oppressing me. And so that's the same way I responded yesterday. Like, and the people understood. They were like glad to hear it. Like, oh, okay, that's great. I'm like, yeah, I don't have that kind of name anymore. I wish more of our people here didn't have them because the fact that we still have them and is a reflection of where a lot of our mentality is at even still today in 2025 and beyond. And I told we talked about it. I told the person there are a couple of Europeans there, and I said, so if your name was Itabari Lumumba, if I asked you your name in this group and you said Itabari Lumumba, everybody would look at you like you were insane. Like, where the hell did you get a name like that? Somebody would, we probably have a discussion about it. How did you get that name? But when Africans answer, my name is John Jones, that's the same thing. It's the exact same thing, but yet nobody flinches because it's so normalized that everything we do is interpreted through the European colonial lens. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll just do our brief introductions like we do each week. And this program, Our Ancestors' Voices, sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP, each week. And the APRP is a revolutionary independent mass Pan-African political party with a base in Africa and an objective of Pan-Africanism, which is one unified socialist Africa. To us, we are convinced that that is the solution to the problems our people face all over the planet Earth. And until Africa is free, united, and socialist, we will continue to engage in a piecemeal existence where we have to validate ourselves to our enemies. We have to wait on our enemies. We have to appeal to our enemies. We don't. We have no interest in that. We want to organize building capacity so that we can solve this problem and not be going back and forth, back and forth. The things that we're dominantly talking about today are things that we fought for 60, 70 years ago, and we're still having to fight for it today. But that's, if you understand struggle, that's the nature of reform work. And everything we've done up to this point has been reform work. There hasn't been a mass revolutionary effort to transform society. It's just been a reform effort, which means to bring concessions within society. So when you have that, you're going to have this dilemma that we have. And in fact, you could even argue that we've gone backwards. That certainly would be my position. And so our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. That's our strategy. And this program is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological child, daughter, Dr. newly uh, sanctioned Dr. Shakur Umi, doctor in public health communication. And so to get us started, I will turn it over to Dr. Umi.
Thank you, Baba Jamu. Appreciate you. Greetings, everyone. What's going on? Thank you so much. Good to be with you. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate you giving us your time today. We are so excited to talk to you in more detail about the legacy and the life of one of our founders and ideological influencers and contributors are Kwame Nkrumah, leader and guidance in terms of our principles, our ethics, such a profound individual. We can start with saying that Kwame Nkrumah was a political activist. He was also, I would say, deemed a leader. And it's interesting that we use that term because I think when you might think about leaders, especially we talked about it in our work study yesterday, but I would encourage you to think about what are the ingredients that makes up a leader. Is a good leader someone who communicates well? Is a good leader someone who takes initiative? Is a good leader considered to be militant, right? Like I want us to really think about that. But I also want us to think about and notice how there are certain terms that we associate with leadership. And usually those terms don't include humanists or egalitarian or disciplined or empathetic, right? And I challenge us to like pull that together and kind of synthesize that a little bit more because I would argue that Nkrumah was everything we described at the beginning, but very much so empathetic. I would argue he was very much so a humanist and an egalitarianist, and I would argue that he only ever wanted Africa to be free, and he wanted African people to benefit from the unification of Africa. That was all he ever wanted. And that's why his legacy reigns true today. That's why we are in this organization. As I said, he was one of the founding members. So, quite literally, this Zoom wouldn't even be happening had he not have the vision that he had. And maybe some other Africans behind him may have come along and created something similar. But the only reason that I am aware of the United States of Africa, the only reason that I am aware that is possible for us to achieve one unified socialist Africa is because he had this vision. And he not only executed it within the Ghanaian people and within the Ghanaian land that he was a part of and that he was the president of, but he also executed it throughout other countries. This is why he built relationships with Sekou Touré. This is why he built relationships with Kwame Touré. This is why he built relationships with W.E.B. Du Bois and Shirley Graham Du Bois. He built relationships with Martin Luther King and so many other people, Amir Cabral. And so just thinking of how much of an impact and why did he build those relationships? Because he wanted Africa to be more connected and uncolonized and divided. That's what he wanted. He wanted us to undo the literal divisions that colonization had put in place, and he wanted us to reconnect the grounds that had been so clearly separated and divided out. He was also a theoretician, and he didn't bend or succumb to imperialist interests. I would argue Nkrumah was probably one of the bravest people that even walked the face of the earth at that time because he knew what he was up against and he knew what a battle it would be. And he didn't stand down. He believed in the African people. He believed that we deserved a better world. And he believed that Africa should and could be free. He believed that. And he understood that until that happens, Africans everywhere will be under attack. It was not enough that he went to school within the African continent and got this foundational education. And I mean education in terms of books, but also education in terms of social experiments and navigating the world as people perceive you education, right? So it wasn't enough that he did that, but he also traveled the world. He was so poor during some of his educational periods that he would work in Baba Jama, I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he would work in like bed and breakfasts type places where all he could afford to do was wash dishes. And I remember he lived in one facility. He didn't even have money to pay rent, but he was able to wash the dishes. And so that allowed him to cover his rent. And then he was in a position to, at least keep a roof over his head, but he couldn't even afford shoes. And he certainly couldn't afford a car. And so the shoes that he had were worn down and they had holes in them, but he would still walk miles and miles and miles to go to school. He has pursued different degrees throughout the world so that he could have these different backgrounds and to be able to really pull together these different concepts. Kind of like Marcus Garvey, he was able to see different experiences that African people were experiencing. And because of that, he was able to draw these connections. He was able to draw these denominators and to see that it was pretty consistent across the board. But it was only because he was able to be in those spaces, living those experiences, right? Having those connections, hearing from people, talking to people, and understanding, okay, this is pretty consistent. And so as a result, they will forever label him as a dictator, an authoritarian, and incompetent. And again, like, what does it mean to be a good leader? Because some would argue that when someone conducts a mass genocide, this is why they are a dictator or an authoritarian. I would argue, we have to understand where the basis of that is coming from. And I would argue with Kwame Nkrumah, he only ever wanted Africans to feel our worth, to know that we deserve a better world, and to understand how much pride we actually need to develop for ourselves and for our people. And I think if Nkrumah were alive longer than he was taken from this earth, I think he would have continued to build on that, and he would have continued to see the connection that African people have with Palestinian people, with indigenous people, with people of Asian descent, even with colonized European descent people, right? Like, he would make those connections to see that we all have a responsibility to support one another, because every single one of us, something has happened where our land has been modified or adapted or manipulated, or we have been taken from our land in some way, shape, or form. And because of that, it has had psychological, physical, spiritual, um, you know, um, ideological implications on us, right? To the point where now we're still trying to figure out what to do next, because we really don't know who we are. We don't know who we are if you subtract all of the white supremacy that has influenced this identity of who we're supposed to be, right? We don't know who we are if you take that away. We don't know who we are if you remove the colonized teachings that have been instilled and forced upon us. We really don't know. This is all the reason why we need to reconnect. And this is why you had Africans like Malcolm X, you had Africans like Martin Luther King, Africans like W.B. Du Bois, Shirley Graham Du Bois, even Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, who all went back home because they understood, I really don't know who I am, and the best place that can teach me the concepts that I am missing, the gaps that I clearly have, would be to go home to the motherland where it started. This is why they went back. This is why we always encourage people to go back, for this reason alone. And even if you are an African like myself, where you have somewhat of an identity, you clearly understand that you are African. And maybe you're even sophisticated enough where you don't use Black or African American like I do. Maybe you intentionally just use African or African descent. That doesn't mean that you still need to go home any less. I can't wait to go home. And I'm not even going to reveal when that is, because I don't need to be, putting pressure on myself in case things happen. But I'm just saying, like, I can't wait to leave. I think the longer that you are in the US, you get bombarded, you get confused, you get propagandized, and then it's harder for you to get on a plane and go. So the more you connect back to your roots, the more that you connect back to who you are, the more that you connect back to the point of things that you probably knew, but also that a lot has happened and changed since the last time you went. And I'm speaking generally. So if you're not African, whatever you identify as home, understand that it's time for you to go back. Understand that you need to be making some plans to do that. One of my favorite quotes by Kwame Nkrumah, he said that we are not African because we were born in Africa. We are African because Africa was born in us. So if you are not African, feel free to substitute whatever the location is for you, and understand that you are that entity because that was born in you, which is all the more reason to stay connected to that. So thinking more about that, and Nkrumah's only crime was caring more about Africa and African people, as well as all of humanity's forward progress, more than he cared about individual riches and prestige. This is literally such a blessing and a gift when I read all of the different books that he has offered to us, from his autobiography to the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. He's got a more complex book that I'm looking forward to reading, The Consciencism. I mean, he's been writing since the beginning of time, and we can really get some information from him about all of his different ways that he's broken things down. His book on Ghana has really been life changing, because that was really a good foundation for me to learn more about the West Coast, but also the Gold Coast, and how he factored in his ability to be the president and what Ghana was really bringing to the table in terms of this larger goal of a United States of Africa being achieved. And so that was all being done because he didn't want to advance himself personally. He didn't want to advance himself individually. And he certainly didn't want to advance his own riches and his prestige. Everything he ever did was only because he wanted African people to be free. He wanted African people to be connected. He wanted us to not have the separatist ideas that we have, the siloism and the tribalism. He didn't want any of that. He didn't want any of that. And if you're in a position to see the photo on the slide, we've got Kwame Nkrumah speaking at Ghana's independence ceremony on March 6, 1957, in Accra, Ghana's Revolutionary Square. And that's one of the reasons I can't wait to get back home. The last time I went to Ghana, they did not have a Kwame Nkrumah museum. They now have that. And that was, I was also 4 when that happened, and now I'm in my 30s. So I'm very much excited to see a lot of the different progressions that are now there and available, because I know that it's going to be life changing, and I know that it's going to be an experience of a lifetime, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to continue to learn and grow. I also look forward to going back home. Next slide, please, because I'm excited to do some work on the continent. That's the other thing that we keep talking about is assuming that we are all in organizations that are working for justice. It's one thing to organize in the diaspora. It's a completely different thing to organize on the continent or whatever the land is that you descend from. I can only imagine how humbling that's going to be. I can only imagine how motivating it's going to be. And I can only imagine how much of a life changing experience it's going to be for me. I cannot wait to do that. And so these are the things that have to remind us why we do this work, but also more importantly, I want Kwame Nkrumah to continue to be proud of the legacy that he has left for me. I am trying my best to preserve his identity and his credibility, but I want to continue to do this work because I want him to be proud of what he left for me. I know that he sacrificed tremendously for African people, and I think it's only fair that we sacrifice for the next generations after us. You know, his integrity was completely unquestionable. It was completely unquestionable for any political entity. The measure of their morality is their integrity. For Kwame Nkrumah, he sacrificed everything from his personal well being to his family for the good of Ghana, Africa, as well as all African masses everywhere. Everywhere. All of this 100% is irrefutable, as this presentation will continue to illustrate. And again, if you can see the photo on the left, Nkrumah posed with participants in the historic Fifth Pan African Congress in Britain in 1945. And I'll just say, as I prepare to hand it back to Baba Ajamu, Kwame Nkrumah is also one of the best authors that I have ever come in contact with in terms of how he's able to take very complex topics and simplify them in a way that anyone could pretty much understand. So whether you were 3 years old or 58 or 27 or 95, if you have a ninth grade education level, if you have a sixth grade education level, his writing capabilities can really help to be articulated in a way that any reader with any educational base would be able to understand where he's coming from. And I think that that is a profound skill to have, because he knew that he was going to have to document the things that were happening, but he didn't want to write in a way that would lose his audience, because he knew that he needed to captivate us. And that is exactly what he did. So we do encourage you to look up some of the books that he has written so that you can get some more information on this profound individual. And when we talk about the United States of Africa, definitely read more into his autobiography, read the Ghana book that he wrote, because he talks in great detail about how he wanted more unification. And I think that in today's world, especially with everything happening to African people, whether it's Haiti or whether it's parts of the Dominican Republic, Nkrumah was on to something. And we can, gaslight him all day, but at the end of the day, we know that he knew what he was talking about. And now more than ever is the time for unity. Ashe.
Ashe, obrigada, asante sana, madasi. Thank you very much. And I think I would add on to what Shakura is saying by talking about starting with Nkrumah's work as the president of Ghana. Ghana was the first independent country in Africa in 1957, and Nkrumah was the first, democratically elected president during that era. And he was the president of Ghana from March of 1957 until February of 1966, when the Central Intelligence Agency led an illegal coup d'etat to overthrow his government. But while in office, the fact is, Nkrumah did more to bring Ghana along educationally and technologically than all of the regimes after him through 2025 combined. And there were about six or seven, I lose count, since Nkrumah. And he did more um, than all of them combined in terms of building infrastructure for Ghana, education, all of these things. He did more under his 6 year socialist development program in Ghana. It's important to say that because a lot of people, particularly in the West, there's this assumption that socialism hasn't accomplished what capitalism has. And I don't know what parameters people use to gauge when they make those statements, but I can easily show you where everywhere that socialism has been legitimately instituted, as it relates to people's development, it's not even a comparison in terms of the gains that were made. And some examples of this are Nkrumah's initial work to build Ghana's electricity capacity in the 1950s. Uh, those efforts were made, and imperialism made so use that as a carrot in front of Nkrumah to try to persuade him to get on their side in the Cold War, the US against the Soviet Union, which he refused to do. So he wasn't able to make the type of advancements with providing electricity for the people of Ghana that he wanted to with the project ideas that he had, the development of the dam project, the Akasambo Dam project, for example. And this work didn't really come into existence until well after Nkrumah's time, the 1980s, under the Rawlings regime, is when the Akasambo Dam project was, finally completed. And when I was in Ghana last year, we went on a trip. My wife and I and a bunch of other folks went on a trip to see the dam and see how it's done, and it's still there's a lot of work to be done as it relates to providing electricity in Ghana. Anyone that knows anything about Ghana and Africa knows that. But the point is that Nkrumah's work was designed to address those problems, and there was constant sabotage to prevent that from happening, and manipulation and coercion and all of these political tools that imperialism uses to prevent you from achieving your self-determination. And Nkrumah's work to bring socialist development in Ghana did produce tangible results as it relates to production, healthcare, education, etc. I would say that today Ghana's healthcare system is as good, if not better, than what you have here in the U.S. And that's easily verifiable just by simply looking at health statistics and seeing where people stand as it relates to disease, life expectancy, all of those things. And they don't have anywhere near the resources in Ghana that you have here. But there's much more of an infrastructure that's designed to at least make a sincere effort to take care of people, which does not exist here in this capitalist society. So this is, these are things that as president, Nkrumah was able to accomplish. And, I give the example, the picture on your screen, if you're looking at it, is the tire factory in Takoradi, Ghana. Takoradi is a city in Ghana. And in 2018, when I was in Ghana we had a 50-year conference after the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare was written, and we had organizers from all over the African world, from Europe, the United Snakes, all over Africa there to participate in this conference. And we went to the tire factory. We toured it in Takoradi, and this tire factory, we went there, as I mentioned, in 2018. The tire factory had been closed since 1966. It closed the day of the coup d'etat, February 24th, 1966, when Nkrumah's government was overthrown. But what's important about the tire factory to note is that that tire factory from 1960 to 1966, under that socialist model, produced hundreds of thousands of tires that had higher quality, performed longer, and perform more efficiently. I mean, this is documented. This is not my opinion. This is documented. This stuff can be documented, right? And it is. The tires that they produced in their socialist tire factory in Takoradi outperformed the tires produced by Firestone Rubber Tire and Rubber in Liberia during that same 6 year period. I'm no question about it. Nobody can question that. And clearly the enemies of humanity understood what I just said, because that's why the first thing they did when they illegally overthrew Nkrumah's government was to close this tire factory in the picture. As you can see, the equipment is antiquated. The tire producing equipment in that picture is from the 1960s. It's not updated. It's not digital equipment. It's not, there's no software. There's none of that. It's old, antiquated equipment that hasn't been touched since the tire factory was closed on February 24th, 1966. And the tire factory was never opened again. In fact, the reactionary forces that overthrew Nkrumah's government closed it that day in 1966 and immediately sold the tire factory to Firestone. And Firestone never reopened it. They never had any intention of reopening it. All they wanted to do is put it out of business because, as I mentioned, it was outperforming them. And they wanted to bury the example that socialist production is better than capitalist production. Because in socialist production, workers are paid respectfully. They're given the proper benefits that they have in a socialist society, health care, and all of these things. And even in this backward society that I live in, we know today, I mean, I work for a labor union for years now. And so there's data on this type of thing that when you take care of workers, they perform better. I mean, that's not rocket science. Everybody that spends 2 seconds thinking about it knows that. And if you just think about your own job, even if you haven't thought about that, the jobs that you've had, when you've been respected on that job, you don't, you know, compared to jobs where you've been disrespected. I've had jobs where I didn't, if I had to be there, I've been fortunate. Every job I've had has been Monday through Friday. I've never had to work weekends or evenings on a regular basis, which I feel is very fortunate. I feel fortunate about that. But I had jobs where I worked for, and I worked in the financial sector. Those jobs, you know, I've had basically 3 jobs my whole life, which accumulate 30 work years of experience, right? And then a few other jobs for a couple of more years. But in those 2 of those jobs were in the financial sector. And I'm telling you, if the clock struck 5 o'clock p.m. and I still had to be there, I would be pissed. I would be pissed and I would be trying to figure out a way to make up for it because the work was so exploited and I didn't feel respected, even though I had, you know, decent positions and made good money and had benefits and all of that. I just, you know, I didn't agree with it philosophically. Number one, that was the biggest problem. You know, it didn't align with my values and principles. And then just, you know, the way private sector operates, it was, you know, they're very disrespectful to you. And so I would be pissed if I had to stay there a minute after 5 o'clock. Now, you know, the job I have with this labor union that I've had for the last 14 years, it's far from perfect. I mean, the labor movement in the U.S. is trash compared to what's happening in the rest of the world. That's just a fact. I mean, we just have so much work that needs to be done here to align ourselves with the working class movement across the planet. But this job is still head and shoulders been above any other job I've had, you know, without even question. And so, because of that, because there is a higher degree of humanity in the job that I do now than there has ever been any thought of having in those other jobs I had. You know, there'll be times when I have to extend my day and I don't have the same, I don't get angry about it. I don't even really think about it. In fact, I'll go into work sometimes on the weekend on my own to do work and not even think about it and not even consider it a problem because the work is work that the values are much more aligned with my principles. The work is much more aligned with my values and principles, I should say. And for that reason, you know, I'm driven to do it. I don't feel like it's a criminal sentence to have to do it. So it's not magic. This is why the tire factory in Ghana was much more successful than the capitalist tire factories all over the rest of Africa. And this is the political legacy of Nkrumah's government, his socialist government. And this is what he saw and knew that we needed all over Africa. And this is what socialists like him understand and understood that we need all over the world. That's why, if you want a proper understanding of the difference between socialism and communism, because you're not getting it from CNN and CIA network, that's why people don't know. And everybody has an opinion, and most of the time it's worthless because there's been no study behind the opinion. It's just people vomiting out what somebody else told them. But if you want a real concrete analysis, socialism is the bridge between capitalism and communism. There's never been communism. We have never gotten there yet, because the only way we can have communism is if the majority of the world is socialist. And obviously that has never happened yet. It will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And the reason why we know that is because communism is a society where you have eradicated class structure. And the only way that can happen is the majority of the world would have to be socialist, because socialism is the mechanism to break down class structure. So, in other words, in socialist Cuba, when they put in their educational system curriculum that is designed to educate their children about African history, for example, because they have that, and about LGBTQ, for example, because they have that. That's a part of their curriculum. Women's history, they have that. It's what their children learn in school. It's not like in this backward country where, teachers are being disciplined for bringing up white supremacy. That's how backward it is here. But they have that as a part of their regular educational curriculum, because they understand that white supremacy, patriarchy, these are values that have been ingrained for centuries. So their socialist model is that these will be things people are learning in school. And after a few generations, the people with these old backward ideas will fortunately die off. And the youth that come up through the system will learn a totally different perspective of how to interact with people based on respect and dignity. And eventually they will wipe out this backwardness. That's how socialism works, you all. That's the whole design, to build. When Nkrumah talked about building a new woman and man, that's what he meant. That's an example of that. So this is why, if we understand Nkrumah's success in this regard, this is the reason why he was in the crosshairs of imperialism. In imperialism, we're talking about the United Snakes of America, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Canada, Australia, the Zionist state of Israel, all of these countries that, have all the wealth in the world because of their exploitation of Africa. That's why they have it. The France dominates all of the Sahel countries in Africa, dominates their currency. We've done programs on it. I'm not going to get deep into it today. You can go back and look at it. But the economies of 8 countries in Africa are held hostage by France. France holds 50% of their annual revenues of these 8 countries, countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, etc., in a French operating account, and holds them hostage so that these countries have to do France's bidding. This is how neocolonialism works in Africa today. That's why Europe and America are rich and Africa is poor. This is the reason why Africa is on fire. And this is what Nkrumah understood 60 years ago, right? And the picture on the left is Kwame Nkrumah with Patrice Lumumba in Ghana before the terrible events of 1961 in the Congo. And of those terrible events, we would argue that Patrice Lumumba, who was assassinated by U.S. intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, in cooperation with Belgium and neo-colonial elements in the Congo, because the person on the ground in the Congo who carried out the assassination was uh, Joseph Desiree Mobutu, later changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko, who was actually a member of Lumumba's National Congolese Movement and was a friend, who Lumumba considered a close friend. And Lumumba, when people warned him about Mobutu, stuck up for Mobutu and trusted him. And Mobutu ended up being the CIA's main man in the Congo. But we know from the events that happened there that Lumumba, who was assassinated in January 1961, would never have lived as long as he did if it were not for the intervention into those affairs in the Congo by Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah convinced Secretary in Guinea, Modibo Keita in Mali, to send troops to the Congo to defend Patrice Lumumba, even though the troops were under the auspices of the United Nations at the time. They understood that their mission was to protect Patrice Lumumba. And unfortunate incidents happened that were no fault of Nkrumah or Touré or Keita. And Lumumba was captured by the Congolese armed forces, which were led by Mobutu, and Lumumba was, of course, brutally and viciously assassinated. But he would have been, that would have happened months before that if it were not for Kwame Nkrumah's intervention. And this, of course, did not sit well with imperialism. They don't like it when they want to sabotage events in the world, and we have the audacity to step in and prevent them from doing that. Because you have to understand that, as we've said many times, Africa is the most resource-rich land base in the world. It has more natural mineral resources in Africa than all the rest of the world, Asia, Europe, the Americas combined. That's just an objective fact. It's not any kind of black superiority statement, because that's what someone said. That's a black superiority. No, I said, no, that's a you don't know what the hell you're talking about statement. That's objectively true. And you don't have to take our word for it. You can listen to the capitalist multinational corporations, and they will tell you that. The oil companies will tell you that. The diamond companies will tell you that. The steel and car manufacturing companies will tell you that. The cobalt and coltan producing companies will tell you that. All of them will tell you. The uranium producing companies will tell you that. The uranium producing companies are not in this country drilling extensively for uranium. They're not, uh, the diamond companies are not here doing that. They know where the resources are, and that's why they're in Africa. That's what they're doing there. So, to address this in 1965, Nkrumah wrote Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And we would argue that it was his writing of this book that sealed his demise in Ghana. Because in this book, he outlined, and this book was written exactly 60 years ago, 6-0. And in this book, people at that time didn't even know anything. They hardly understood colonialism, definitely didn't understand neocolonialism. And Nkrumah lays it out in this book when he talks about neocolonialism being the Europeans no longer being in Africa physically, right? The French were forced out of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, etc. They had to go back to France. The British were forced out of Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania. They had to go back to Britain. The Germans were forced out of Azania. Well, they weren't, because they had apartheid, but a lot of them left as the anti-apartheid movement picked up steam. Zimbabwe, same thing. They had to leave. Belgium had to leave the Congo. The Portuguese were forced out of Guinea-Bissau, Angola, and Mozambique. And so Nkrumah in this book talked about, even though they no longer were physically, because at that time we were like, oh, the Europeans are gone, we're free. Even when Azania or South Africa ended apartheid in 1994, that talk happened. Oh, we're free. There's no more colonialism in South Africa. But in Nkrumah's book, he outlined that that's not true, because what they did is they put a system in place where, even though they were no longer physically there, they ensured that the people who managed the society were trained by them and were committed to fulfilling their class interests, the interests of imperialism, the interests of the colonizing countries. So if you look at the Congo, for example, in 1960, when the Congo became independent, there were only 15, 1-5, technically educated, college educated people in the entire country. And this was by design. So they had to rely on people from the US and from Belgium. When Nkrumah's government was overthrown, the military officers were from Britain in Ghana. So this is what neo-colonialism looks like. And this is what he outlined in this book. And he exposed the system, which is still the dominant problem in Africa today, neo-colonialism. And this is why Nkrumah had to go. This is the reason why he had to go, because he was able to expose this. And also, but this is the problem with imperialism. This is their weakness, is that they believe that if you kill somebody, then you eliminate their ability to have influence. I mean, that's insane. Like, they don't understand culture. They don't understand that, as Fred Hampton said, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the ideas of the revolution. You can't kill the revolution. So they think when they overthrew Nkrumah's government that, well, we solved that problem, but all they did is proliferate it, because Nkrumah was welcomed into Guinea by Secretary, and we would argue that those years that he was in Guinea, from 1966, February 1966, we already said that it was actually March, because Nkrumah was in Vietnam at the time the CIA overthrew his government in Ghana, because he was in China on his way to Vietnam to help broker peace with the U.S. Vietnam War. And his government was overthrown. And so he couldn't go back to Ghana because they would have killed him, or at least, at the very least, imprisoned him for life. So he was welcomed by Secretary into Guinea, and that's where he went, and that's where he spent the rest of his life, the last 6 years of his life in Guinea Conakry. And it was there that he wrote. It was there that his work with the book Neo-Colonialism proliferated. It was there that he followed that up with some of his best work, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, Revolutionary Path, Class Struggle in Africa. And these are the works that have really defined the perspective that we have on international imperialism and fighting for Pan-Africanism today. And Nkrumah, we don't talk a lot about his work with Revolutionary Path, but Revolutionary Path, those series of articles were designed to greatly articulate the connection between the Black Power movement here in the US and the African liberation struggle in Africa. It's brilliant. 60 years ago, this was being discussed, right? And so Nkrumah was, as always, at the forefront of the ideas around liberation. Shakur talked about wanting to read Conscientism, his book Conscientism that he wrote in 1964, groundbreaking book on revolutionary African political consciousness. And in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we call it, what Nkrumah introduced to us, the Revolutionary African Personality, or RAP, which is the ideology of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which builds on the three historical components of Africa: traditional Africa, the European Judaic intrusion into African culture, and the Islamic intrusion. Or you don't have to use the word intrusion if you don't want to, but the European Judeo-European existence in Africa, and the Islamic existence in Africa. Those three things. So the point Nkrumah was making in Conscientism is all of us as African people have some element of all three of those elements that make us up: traditional Africa, Judeo-Christian, Islamic. That's not saying that, well, all of you are Muslims. It's saying that all of us have some elements of all three. It might be 60% of one, 20% of another, 20% of the other. It might be 33, 33, 30. We all have all three that make us up as African people. And the traditional elements are elements of our culture, right? The humanism, the egalitarianism, the collectivism. These are African cultural components. No matter where we're born in the world or where we speak, we have that. And you have to, in order to understand African people, you have to understand it. That's why when a racist is killed, like that European that was shot and killed here last week, that racist fascist that was killed, that's why you have African people saying, I pray for his family. Anybody that knows anything about the United States, whenever any African is killed, when Martin Luther King was killed, when Malcolm X was killed, when George Floyd was killed, it doesn't matter who it is. these people in this country cheer for that. They make jokes about it. It's a you don't there's no Europeans talking about I pray for his family. You don't even see that. You never even heard of no shit like that. But whenever the worst element, and this cracker that was killed a week or so ago, the worst element of European people is killed or dies, you're still compassion and empathy from our people because that is a part of our culture, whether we deny it or not. And we're saying that because Nkrumah advanced these ideas about African culture so that we can use them as tools to fight for our liberation. And also, Nkrumah did not have a racialist analysis of the world. He did not have that. He did not see in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, he writes about revolutionary outsiders, as he called them. And essentially, what he argues, I know this is not stuff that, black nationalist people like to talk about, but I couldn't give a damn. We're trying to work towards truth. We're not trying to deal with people's feelings and their inadequacies and your insecurities. That's your problem. You got to do work to work on that. We're talking about, and Nkrumah talked about, there are Europeans in Africa who fight for African liberation legitimately, and that we accept them as a part of our movement. And that would make sense to me because Nkrumah wasn't confused. He didn't think that because you're black, you're automatically, like you hear people say, I I'm rooting for everybody black, and I'm not. Some of these so-called black people need to be destroyed. I mean, they're causing untold havoc against our people, and there are many Europeans who are better allies to us than some of us here today. There was a sister that she was complaining about this program, and her whole argument to me was that Nkrumah had a Arabic wife, an Arab wife, Fathia Nkrumah. And so to her, this discredited him from any credibility working for African people. And I explained to her, well, we all know that that marriage was a political one. He didn't even know the woman before the day they were married. They had never had a conversation. And after the coup d'etat in 1966, he never saw the woman or his children again. And that was not an easy thing for him. But my point is that, she didn't know that history. And I said that, the difference between you and me is that you, because of who he married, even though you don't know anything about that marriage, because of who he married, you want to dismiss all of his contributions. And to us, we cannot we can't look at just who he married and devalue his great contribution to our people's liberation. And that's it. And so she still wanted to argue. And I told her, like, look, I know you're not in any organization. Well, how do you know that? I'm like, because people in organizations don't talk like this. Only individuals talk like this. I've been around the block a few times. So I told her, you don't know, you do whatever you're gonna do for our people, which I think is nothing beyond just trying to attack the work like this that's going on. And I'll continue to do what I'm doing. But the point is that Nkrumah didn't have that kind of race analysis, and we're collectively as a people, we're not there yet. We're too injured, wounded to have an intelligent conversation about this. But one day we have to get there. The European, just because they're European, is not our enemy, and the African, just because they're African, is not our family. That's just objectively true. And Nkrumah had a clear class analysis around this. And again, we're not there yet, but we got to get there at some point. And some other things not talked about enough was Nkrumah's outstanding work to build an international revolutionary network. He was the major region that Frantz Fanon and Patrice Lumumba became close friends, and he mentored both of them. I mentioned he mentored Lumumba. Shakur mentioned Malcolm X. As the pictures illustrate, Shirley Graham Du Bois. In fact, Shirley Graham Du Bois was a major part of the reason that Malcolm X was able to meet Kwame Nkrumah, as you see in the picture there. Shirley Graham Du Bois was the reason that Kwame Ture was introduced to Kwame Nkrumah and Secretary. She talked Kwame Ture out of renouncing his U.S. citizenship. She's in the picture there on the left with Nkrumah and Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael then. And had she not had that conversation with the young Stokely Carmichael, he would not have been able to come back to this country and build the All African People's Revolutionary Party, as was his assignment in the first work study circle with Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré and Lamine Jonga and Guinea Conakry in 1968. And if he hadn't done that, I don't know if I could be here in the capacity I'm in right now. Because the first place I heard about the APRP was at uh, Fresno State University here in California in 1980, where Kwame Ture was speaking. So we mentioned his writings during his years in Guinea Conakry continue to guide Pan Africanist work worldwide today. And so Nkrumah hasn't been, is not here. He hasn't been here in going on 60 years in a physical form, but his political and ideological work continues to live through all of us. We are all Kwame Nkrumah, just like we're all Sekou Touré, we're all Amilcar Cabral, we're all Shirley Graham Du Bois and Carmen Piera and Teodoro Gomez and Mbalia Kamara, Asada Shakur, Malcolm X. We're all of them because we continue to do the work through the vision, the guidance, and the sacrifice that they gave us. And so, with that, we want to thank you for joining us, and we want to definitely invite you back next week. Please come on Sunday, September 21st. We're going to have a very interesting program. The topic is going to be from Africa to Alabama to Oakland, the real history of the Black Panther Party. From Africa to Alabama to Oakland, the real history of the Black Panther Party. We want to invite you to scan the red and white QR code in the upper left-hand corner. It has all of the online AAPRP programs in it, and then you can go to the website, which I'll talk about quickly for in-person programs. Forward Ever Shop is in that QR code. You can buy clothing, hoodies, t-shirts that help support the work of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we definitely hope you will do that. And hoodcommunist.org is a revolutionary Pan-African blog. So check that out. You can find that there. If you're in the Sacramento area, we continue every Thursday. We have community self-defense, teaching you how to defend yourself, your family, and your community. Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific time, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. You just have to come, you all. You don't need to register. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to pay anything. Oh my, I mean, these capitalist models. Just come and build community with us. That's it. Go to www.aaprp-intl.org. You can join the APRP and find out about the work happening within the APRP around the world. And Burkina Books, the QR code on the bottom right, the black and white one, allows you to become a monthly sponsor for our APRP work on the ground in the Sahel region of Africa, Burkina Faso and Niger, and I'm sure soon Mali as well, and other places. So become a monthly sponsor so that you can support that work. And again, want to encourage you to buy my book, tell people about it, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 US. The digital version is only $5 US. Unfortunately, you can only get it on Amazon, and I use them. I know they're the enemy. I certainly don't need you to tell me that, but I also know that they print the book and send it worldwide, and I don't have to pay for any of that. And so, no money out of my pocket. And that book has been purchased all over the world on 3 different continents in the Caribbean. So, if you have a suggestion for how I can do that without any expense money coming out of my pocket, I'm all ears. If you don't, I'm really not trying to hear anything you have to say about it, because we're trying to do work to advance our people. And I have 3 different publishers I've worked with previous books, and they've all been criminals. The publishing industry is a criminal enterprise, and Amazon is no different. But I do get the royalties, and I use 100% of them to fund my anti-fascist work. I mentioned at the beginning of the program, the self-defense classes are a part of that. I buy supplies for the people that come. I don't charge them anything. They're learning how to defend themselves and their families and their communities. And so I use funds from this book to help finance that. So if you buy the book, it's a great book, great organizing book. But if you buy it, you're helping to contribute to that. So start a book club. Tell your local library to order it. That's a 5 minute phone call. Tell them to order the book and put it in there. And that helps us do this work. So we appreciate you. Hope you do these things. Um, you either on the side of justice or you're not. And as Kwame Ture said, inactivity puts you on the not side. So don't be that person. Have a great rest of your evening. Forward ever.